constitute a wonderful sunny night at the Mark Twain.
Who are you?
I'm here to represent the Hermes art series. That's I just wanted to say thank you, and Hermes is delighted. I mean, I have to tell you, I think Helen and Alan would be so delighted with this program because it really identifies and celebrates the real talent that lives in this community. They would be so pleased. So, the first talent is B.O.B., Bob Marley. Marty. An artist and a master moderator. So it's up to you now.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really, we're going to have some fun tonight, I hope. At the end of about an hour, we're going to take some questions. So if you would, just hold your questions till then, unless you kind of feel the urge, and then shout it out, and we'll try to deal with it. I want to thank the library for doing this, like June did. This is an amazing institution we have here in Reading, and it's been here a long time, and it requires community support. As we all know, probably Mark Twain didn't want a politically involved organization, municipal library, so they had a community library, is that what it's called? Anyway, where we have to raise some money and whatever. So it's all of you who do that and make it all possible. So there's that. And then I want to thank the people that came up with this idea, which is Carolyn Prusa, back in the back of the room, a wonderful novelist, and Tom Casey. He's also, is he Tom here? Mm-hmm. Yay, Tom! Tom's here. And so they came up with the idea of the secret lives of artists, and then Elaine Sanders and Stephen Massa and I got together and we kind of dreamt up what you're hopefully going to enjoy tonight. The concept is the panel is to kind of go behind the scenes with all these amazing people from different disciplines. Emmy Award winning writer, internationally renowned painter, award-winning document. There's so many awards on this panel. Award-winning documentary filmmaker and iconic jewelry designer and sculptor.
World famous.
So. Okay, so that's it. So I just want to say, this is Annie Evans. Annie Evans is a writer, playwright, television writer. Rob is an artist, a painter, terrific painter. We own some of his work. Love it. And Cindy Meal is a documentary filmmaker who just last year had the premiere of the Jimmy Grashow documentary, Jimmy and the Bean. Morris is an old friend of mine who we discovered each other in Reading, of course, and is a terrific, amazing man in many ways, a jewelry designer, but also a sculptor, and so much more. So, I've asked everybody to kind of be really, really as frank with you as possible. So what we're trying to do is actually really get into how people live and sustain a creative life. I mean, so that's kind of a hard thing to figure out and to be able to explain to other creative people and the people who are less creative. So I'm going to start with a very simple question. Is like, well, I know my phone. Everybody should turn their phones off, including me. So Annie, let's start with you. Your origins as a creative person, as an artist, quote unquote. When was that?
I mean, since the beginning, because when I was very young, even like 6th grade, I wrote a book about a girl and a cat, and they were orphans, of course, because everyone was an orphan when you were a kid. And and it was read out loud to the 6th grade class, and they pretended it was it was a published book. And they read it to the kids, and then afterwards they said the author is Anna. I was actually Anna, as I expected. And so I always knew that I was going to try to pursue something, art, but I went many different places. I was a hoofer for a long time, right. And I danced and sang in sort of summer stock theaters and things like that. And then realized when I went to university that there was people much better at that than me, but nobody could write a scene like I could. So that's when I started to focus back on writing and playwriting, and I've been doing that. So,
Great.
so it was always in there, you know.
So that adulation that you got when you were in 6th grade.
Yeah, that was a high. I was worried that was my 15 minutes, but
Rob, I love your paintings, and you've been an artist for a long time. Talk about how that started. Were you that kid with a crayon at 5 years old?
Always a kid with a crayon. So I kind of, I played sports and things like that as a kid, but it always sort of went back to creating something. And then, after high school, went to Parsons, graduated with a degree in graphic design and illustration. And then from then on, all my jobs were creative. Not what I wanted to do exactly, but graphic design and illustration, and eventually art direction. And then after that, I built up my art career on the side and was able to leave a day job and do this full time. And it's been since 2011.
Wow, great. Cindy, talk to me about that. Actually, I know everybody quite well, but I've never asked you when did it start, Cindy? Like your pursuit of the story.
Of the story. Well, it's funny because I really didn't ever think about being a filmmaker. I started out as an artist when I was a kid. I always took art classes, and my parents were very supportive of that. And so I always call myself like the reluctant filmmaker because I never took a class for filmmaking, and I actually I kind of stumbled into it in a weird way. And so my first film was called Buck, and it just took off. And yeah, I went to like 600 theaters and won a lot of awards, and I was like, this is a good thing to do. So I kept doing it, but it was, I would really consider myself more of an artist. And to me, I thought, well, it's still a frame, so it's just putting a vision on a frame. But I can talk about that more later when you ask for our secrets and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, but yeah, basically art.
So I had a very exotic upbringing. By the time I was 18, my parents had made 23 major moves. U.S. Air Force, air bases everywhere. A lot of time spent all over the country from, 3 months in this place, 6 months in this place, 2 months in this place. From one corner of the country to the next by car with no air conditioning, We saw all the sites, then we went to Japan, and then came home, went to Rio, and I became filled with culture and having to adjust constantly to new friends and new people, new things, but it was Japan that really got me. I mean, that's when I knew I had artistic sensibility, and when I started taking classes in flower arranging, oh my God, and in calligraphy and stuff like that as a 7 or 8 year old American kid. So yeah, that was the beginning of my inklings of, I really like this. This satisfies me. Football didn't so much.
So what I'd like to do is talk about like your current incarnation as an artist, right? So rather than go back to the very beginning, but I did want to kind of hear, because it seems there's a commonality here that we all kind of knew when we were really young that we were different. I don't know how that difference manifested it in all of us, but that we were looking at being creative as opposed to making money or to learning a science or something like that. So, but today I'd like to talk about where the current ideas come from, because that's a really interesting thing that people don't really understand, how sometimes you stumble on them or sometimes. But anyway, so let's start with Cindy. No, but seriously, where does that come from? How does that happen? How do you get?
Decide what I want to make a film about.
Yeah, I mean, Buck. Let's start with Buck, because that was your coming out film.
Well, and I honestly didn't ever plan to make a film. I was in one of his clinics, and I was really inspired. And he was talking about the book he wrote was going to be made into a film. A narrative film, and I kept thinking, this guy's such an amazing, powerful person, it's never going to be the same as him. Who are they going to cast, right? Who could play Buck? He's larger than life, he's full of wisdom. all this stuff. So I just thought I should make a documentary about it. I mean, literally, that's what it was. And it's one of those moments where I had never mentioned that to my husband. I had never told my friends. Like, I was an artist, a mother, blah, blah, blah. And so I just went up and asked him when he was having lunch. One time he was with an entourage of people. He always had an entourage around him. And I said, you know, I think I'd like to make a documentary about you. And he said, okay. I'm not kidding. And it's like, okay, could you just write your number down? Because I think I have to call you about something. And he did on a little piece of paper. I wish I had kept it. I don't think I did. And it was a 2-minute conversation. And then that started this path of my life from artist mother to, okay, now I'm a filmmaker. And it was kind of, and I didn't even tell my friends because it was laughable, right? I mean, you know, Cindy's making a movie, and I think that they did talk behind my back. A movie. You know, it was kind of a joke. So I wouldn't talk about it. I just kept my head down and just did it. And I think that you have to follow your heart sometimes. Like it's a perfect example of, you know, something's way larger than you, and you have to seize that moment. Like,
And the film is killer.
It-
The book is killer. I saw it the time it came out.
Yes, it
And
was
I
crazy.
couldn't believe the love and the empathy and the star power of this guy. I mean, he must have enchanted you.
So if you don't know, just give a really brief description of who he is, who Buck is.
He's like a horse whisperer. They based actually the movie The Horse Whisperer on him, even though it wasn't like about an affair. He really is just this horse whisperer guy, really brilliant with horses, world class, top of. I would put him up against any horseman, and I, you know, for me, it's like you say, like, why would you choose this, or why would I choose Jimmy? I think for me, when you were so moved by something, and I'm pretty savvy. I lived in New York 10 years, and I, you know, grew up. I've been around the world. If I'm moved by something, then it must be really special because I'm kind of jaded, like most people, right? I mean, you've seen everything, and so for something to really move me to where I would say I'm gonna go out on a limb and do something, you know, that's what makes me.
But when I was hanging with you when you were starting to make that, what I was impressed with was your tenacity. Because you didn't know a lot.
I didn't know anything.
But then you went out and got like the best people. You know, you found out who's the best people, and you went and you hired them, and you went and just, you know, knocked on doors and stuff, and that was, I think, extremely impressive.
I fired a lot of people early on.
I remember
They didn't see my vision, and I knew who was I. Well, of course they didn't see it, and they thought, who are you? But then I just kept getting somebody that saw the vision.
So Annie, talk to me. You just had a play at the Ridgefield Theater Barn that Julie and I went to, and it was truly an amazing experience. Sybil's ride. And Martin Robinson was part of that. And Pam Arthur. But talk about that. So because I want to get into people's kind of commercial work and their personal work. But Sybil feels to me like one of your personal projects.
Yeah, it was very personal.
Talk about that.
Well, I mean, but I would never have been able to do the personal projects. Like I've got 2 now that I have. Anna's Elephants that we did 2 years ago in New York, and then I've got Sybil.
What is Sybil? For the
Sybil,
people who didn't see it, you missed something.
You missed. It's about Sybil Ludington, who did a ride much like Paul Revere's, but 3 times as far and in the rain.
And she was 15 years old.
16 years old. And she did it. It was right here. I mean, it was mustering troops for the Battle of Ridgefield, which was almost a year from now will be the anniversary of 250 years from the Battle of Ridgefield. So it was following. I learned about her story. And I got very impressed with it and wanted to know more. So I kept researching, and I learned about how some people don't believe she did it because she's a girl. She was 16. Girls didn't do those things. They don't have any written proof and all that. And so I started to really investigate, that in terms of, why wouldn't she have done it and kind of things. But the only reason I was able to do that is because of the commercial work that I did for 23 years at Sesame Street, so I can afford to now do some things I want to do now, in the sort of retirement. So that is, part of an artist's life, in terms of, how do I survive? things. But for now, where I am as an artist, it's kind of interesting because I started as a playwright coming out of Brown and lived like 10 years of wonderful, poverty chic, my friend called it, living in New York, where you're broke as hell, but the rich people take you out and you go do theater and you're burning the candle on both ends. And doing just seeing theater all the time, but then going into children's television, which is a whole other world, and then traveling the world with the children's television in Sesame Street. Marty and I went everywhere. But then now that sort of chapter closed, I was there for 27 years, then I'm now is free to do my own stuff again. And finally, I come back to theater, which was my first love and the first things that I did. And the only difference is that I've come in at it as a much better writer, because television really teaches you how to write, because it's got to be fast and funny and no extra time for anything. And then children. And so I really, I'm not interested in writing play. I mean, there's lots of playwrights out there, but not as many who are writing good plays for children and families, for families to come and laugh and have a great time and really learn something along with their kids. So, which is what Sesame Street was good at for a long, long time.
So, Robert.
Which?
You were talking about sort of like when you were in Japan. So I'm curious, when you look at the forms of your beautiful pieces, they seem to fall into different categories, but how do you find the inspiration? You walk into your studio, and then what? You look at nature? You look at...
Okay, well, I have a couple of things, to say. And another word just popped into my head, which is the calling. We artists have callings. We don't know what we hear them. They're coming from a different dimension. And what they do is, as children, those callings are already alive. They're already there for us. But we're growing up, and we have a lot of things to figure out. But what do we really want to do? Who are we? What are my skills? What's my body like? And then you find yourself plugged in to this. And it's really information that's coming down through your pineal gland. It is your dream states. It's inspiration that hits you. And like I've heard in all these, well, I haven't heard your story yet, but...
I have a pineal gland. What is
yes,
Don't worry, it won't hurt you.
well, no, pineal gland, right? That's where all the energy, that's where it all comes in. So basically, when I go into my studio, I just go like into the socket, and I'm plugged in. Because everything around me is like a phantasmagoric, psychedelic experience that I've made all this stuff in my little studio in Bethel. And so I go immediately to another level, a dimensional level. And all I have to do at this point, after this long career I had where I was under pressure to do collection after collection after I had collections. I did 28 collections in a row for Donna Karen. 28 in a row, 4 a year, back to back in New York City.
Yeah, not Bethel.
No.
Well, you said I'm in Bethel, so I just want to make sure they know. Right.
But the pressure of having to create on schedule with all the licenses and all that kind of stuff, I learned to just like, okay, open sesame, and in come the ideas. I have to be plugged into anthropology and native art and all, history and all that, but I feel like all of us are batteries. We chop our work, raises the vibrations of people. That's what people plug into art to get a charge. When you look at stuff that you love, you can't stop looking at, whether it's sculpture or painting or films or music there's a bond, there's a spiritual psychic bond that connects you that you just can't explain. It's an ineffable love, and you find yourself aligning.
It challenges us, right? I think art challenges the viewer, right? To look inside yourself and get lost in whatever that piece of art is.
Go ahead, Rob, tell us, where the idea?
I started off in advertising. And a lot of what I started looking at was advertising from the 50s and 60s and looking at how that has changed over the years. And so when I was working for Adidas in Portland, they were sending me all over the United States, and we were looking at different accounts. And a lot of that had to do with places down on the border, so like Route 66. And my boss at the time, he was a skateboarder like me, he was a photographer. We would all, as a group, take photos of everything that we saw. And so when I came back to my studio, which was about this big at the time, I started sort of looking at the world and America and what it was and what it's becoming. And I really gravitated towards that 1950s culture, the cars of that era, the neon signs. Like there was a vibe about that time that doesn't really exist anymore. And so that's really what I started creating. And from there, it sort of spiraled. You know, it went in different directions, but it always had those 2 decades in mind.
So why don't we stay with you for just a second, because there's something we touched on before that Annie talked about, which I find fascinating, is the commercial, which sounds like it's not genuine, and that's not what I mean. Commercial work can be actually hone your skills, as you were talking about, Annie, or you, Robert, but I'd like to talk about that, your personal work and the work that you want to have commercially available to people. And they can be both, but sometimes they're different. Can you talk about that? If there's a tension there?
Well, I think that there's a synergy between the two of them, right? Because I came from advertising, I came from graphic design, and my work speaks directly to that. But the way that it's made is minus a computer, right? So I wanted my hands to be dirty. I wanted to be feeling the paper and, you know, really involved in the work, which I felt when I worked for Adidas, it was the same thing. Like we were constantly designing season after season after season, and most of it was just computer work, you know, which I really felt like you lose your personal self when you do that, for me at least, in graphic design. And so my last day job, which was for New York as an art director, I was also still doing graphic design, and a lot of that I specifically took away from the computer. And I was hand drawing things, and I was doing things, and then at the end we would scan it in and make it, you know, we would digitize it. But I really wanted to make art, you know. So, but I think there is a graphic sensibility about my work that speaks to graphic design and illustration.
Right, absolutely.
As a writer, the big difference for me, commercially and non-commercially, is particularly when you're writing for film and television, is you don't own it.
Right.
You know, so I'm hired. A hired person. The script belongs to the company who's hired me, and so I have very little say, which is the hardest thing. Like you could, you know, I have what you talked about. You know, when I sit down at the computer, I write on the computer now for the last 25 years, and you just sort of just sit there, and it just starts coming. And I always say it's a higher power. You know, there's sometimes things come through, and it's like, wow, you know, it's like I didn't think that way. And I'm very funny on page. In real life, I don't crack jokes. You know, not like that.
You are funny on the page.
I'm hysterical on the page. And I don't know. You know, I have a boyfriend who said, "I didn't know you were funny," and it's like I didn't either. It always comes out funny. You know, so that I do know exactly what you're talking about with that. That somebody's much funnier up there, and it comes through. But the fact that they can change anything of mine, you know, just completely rewrite it, you know, reshoot it. It says, you know, you love it and you own it. And some of the skits that I wrote particularly for Sesame, you know, there's some kids shows I wrote, it's like, oh, forget about it, you know. But the Sesame ones were particularly, you know, strong, you know, because there is a mission. They still could get changed, you know. I don't know, you know, I have no, you know, connection to them beyond once they're shot. But for your as a playwright, you own the work. It's yours, and what you say goes. And there's such a difference.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. If it sucks, it's still yours, you know. So, you know, when we're doing Sybil or Annika, you know, it's like, it comes back to me. Doug, you want to change the line? Can we change the line? They have to ask me. There's a big difference, and it really makes it much more yours as something you're giving, you know, to the audience.
Right.
Can I tell a secret right now?
Oh,
sure.
So,
Brenda's here,
to your
right?
point, she knows. To your point about that, when I really decided to make a switch was when I was working for Element Skateboards, and I loved the brand. I loved everything about it, and the company got sold to Billabong, and I decided to leave at that point. And it's exactly what I said. I want to own what I make, and that's when I started to transition and make art, because if it was a failure, it's my failure, and if it's a success, it's my success. And that was important to me, to have a signature on something.
Yeah. Yeah. So Cindy, I was thinking about you and the role, it's kind of the same as this, but the role that the audience plays in the process. So in other words, one of the things that's interesting for all of these folks, I think, is, commercial often just means how do you connect to the widest possible audience, because you can get paid for that on one way or another. But even if you're not trying to do it from making money as a job, but I want to know, like for you, how critical, when you're in the process of creating, are you thinking about the viewer at the end, or are you only thinking about yourself as the viewer? Do you kind of like think personally and then go big and go, I wonder what people will think about this? Or do you tailor your work to reach the audience?
Well, I think our job as a filmmaker is you were trying to bring people into a world that they are not familiar with. But through doing that, they find some self-awareness. Because if I make a film that I like, and I think, oh, this Horse Whisperer guy is just so fabulous, but if if it's not about you, if the audience doesn't say, yeah, that's so, I need that lesson, I need to hear that, or this is exactly my life, and so I'm always looking for the universal, universal, juicy thing that makes everybody, aware and humanity come together in a way that they really rise up. It's uplifting, and to me, that's really, the mission of my company is that we're not looking to, do the dirty tell-all kind of docs. I'm very into things that are really moving and uplifting, but it's about you. If I'm not hitting an audience, then why am I making it? Because, I could go off and have a much better time just hanging out with my horses or something, but, I really, as commercially, because I've directed 3 films, which I own, or at least I can have some say in it if somebody uses buy them, but I'm also exec producer on many films, and I come in creatively, and I have a lot to say, but then at the end of the day, the director of that film gets to make the final decision. So, but even those films, I always choose films that I think are really important and need to be made. It's not just like, I'm making a film and put my name on it, so, yeah.
And so Robert, like when you talked about the collections for Andy Warhol, Donna Karan, Calvin Klein, like whoever, all these incredibly famous fashion designers, was that work as satisfying as the work that you did for...
There's no difference.
There's no difference?
0 difference.
Oh my God.
There's no line between commercial and personal. There's all one thing.
Wow.
Every pair of earrings I made, every ring I made it by my hand, either with wax or metal. I made it I was channeling something into each design. I don't know where it came from, but I had the obligation to come up with themes that would constantly change as fashion changed, but I worked non-stop, and today, I still work every single day, but I start the day at work by saying, whatever I do, I want to do something that's going to raise my vibrations and raise the vibrations of anyone who sees it. So if you were to come into my studio, you'd go way up there.
It's true, I've been there.
In this world that we live in right now, the only solution is to go higher. Bring your vibrations up so you're not living in fear, you're not living in sorrow and anger and all that. And so I go in and say, I'm happy as can be every day making stuff.
So great. I have a question.
I have a question though.
Sure.
So when you were working for one of these famous labels, would they ask you to change something, or did you have carte blanche?
It was always such a collaboration.
It was collaboration.
It was like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers kind of thing, where you just. I mean, I was her part of Donna's arm, and he counted on me to give him this new boost, this like punctuation that took his clothing and his runway show up another notch. And I won awards for doing that over and over, and I got really used to the audience reaction. I mean, I was constantly reading Vogue and Women's Wear Daily, New York Times Fashion Magazine. I was in them all the time. So I was getting feedback every single day, every single month, every single year. And that feedback just filled me.
So how did that feel? No, but I want to talk to all of you about that because at Sybil's ride, there was a standing ovation. That sense that, and Cindy, Jimmy and the Demon, standing ovation. Rob, a lot of people, they don't give you standing ovations, but they love your work and they buy your work at galleries all around the world.
Yeah.
So, and it's just like that adulation.
Oh, just tonight when we came in, my wife Susan got a library card. When she saw it and she realized that it was Robert Mars design, it just made her so happy. It's little things like that. That's our job. Oh, one other thing I have to say. Marshall McLuhan said something, that really hit me, which is that artists are the antenna of society.
Ooh, I like that.
We have a gift. We have a thing. It's a genetic thing. I don't know what it is, but we are blessed, artists of all kinds. We're blessed with this gift that we have. It's our obligation to share it with the rest of humanity. The people who can't go into that ethereal place where, where where ideas flow and visions are happening. It's our job to bring it down and spread it to the people.
Is there any, psychedelics involved? So what I would like to talk about, because I want to talk about the sacred space. So I was a TV producer for a long time, and you sit in an editing room, you're very familiar with that, but it's kind of a sacred place. And Robert talked about going into his studio. Annie, do you have a special place you write, or do you have the right cup of the mug with the coffee? I mean, we all have these rituals around being creative. Robert takes his psychedelic, and just kidding. But so, can you talk about that? Because sometimes you have to get ready. I need a pencil. I need a thing.
I always needed all those little, nigglies, because I'm still taking care of them. And
God bless you.
I have, unlike my husband, I'm very neat. And so if things aren't all put away and in their place, it's hard for me to get started. So I always have to make sure things are good. And then, strangely enough, my favorite writing place is in bed. I sit up in bed and I have, and then I'll transfer. I would write up when I was writing it by hand when I first started writing professionally, and then I would put it in the computer. But now I would just have my little laptop, and then I'll transfer it to the big one, and then I'll go and and work. And I have in my office that has the bigger computer. But I really like the sort of comfort of the warmth of being in bed, and I have my tea and things like that. So that's sort of my special place, kind of.
Talk about your studio. I've been there many times, and it does feel, maybe sacred makes it sound something, but it is kind of a sacred space because you go in there and it's like going inside your brain because there's little things hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
There's tear outs from Life magazine or whatever that are.
There's guitars. I think it just needs to be a comfortable space. There's two skylights that bring great light into the space. I can look out to the pond where we have koi. I can look out to the backyard, which is nothing except trees. I think that is different than when I was in New York, when I looked to a brick wall, but that inspired me at that time, and this inspires me now. And I don't think that I would want to go back to New York and have that space, because I don't think that fits my need right now. I think having space to breathe is really important. And my studio is not that large, but it's comfortable for me. And I think that's what it is. And then, it's never neat because I do collage, right? So there's evidence of things happening. And I think that that's important too. I think people come in and they see that. They see the floor with, just stuff all over it. There's paint, there is, evidence of what I made. And I think that that's interesting too because they're a byproduct of the art.
Right. Cindy, talk about because I have a little experience in this, but talk about what happens when you're interviewing your subject, whether it's Buck or Jimmy. There's some kind of little bubble that happens between the person doing the interview and the subject that feels very sacred, as it does for me also in the editing room. There's something that happens where the world goes away, like Robert's talking about, and it's just kind of all right there, right now, in the moment, and you're listening intently.
Well, partly, and maybe, I don't know, I think every director's different, and I don't know how they do it. I honestly often wonder, like, how do they prepare? Because I will spend days writing notes and things that I think I should ask, and I really like to ask the unexpected personal question, but I also often talk to people, like if let's say I don't know somebody, like I'm gonna go interview somebody I've never met. So I'll call them up and I'll have a long conversation and kind of get them relaxed and talking about things. And I'll discover things I never knew I wanted to talk about, and I'll be writing notes. And so when I go for the interview, it's still very fresh, but it's, I kind of know where I am and they're more comfortable with me. So, and but for me, it's always a lot of pressure that day. Like I feel extreme pressure the days that I go and do interviews because you kind of make it a thing. Normally we're barricade shooters, so we're just running around filming whatever they're doing, so it's no pressure for them. They're just doing them. But when you're really asking them questions, you don't want to waste the time. I mean, I think my interviews are average 2 hours maybe. Some people will do longer. I know, and it seems long, like that seems like a long time, but I've heard that a lot of directors even do longer interviews. But it's hard to do interviews. It really, it is, but it's one of the things I enjoy the most, because I honestly like to talk to people and hear about their story, and you listen, and what you think you're going to ask, you suddenly go, they'll answer something, and then you go off on that rabbit hole. So you have to be a good listener too. I have a lot of good listeners, so, but it's kind of an intimidating thing to do, but I do love it.
Right, so I'd like to really talk about the process just a little bit. One aspect of it that I think is very interesting. So you have the idea, something inspires you, an old ad or a shell or a piece of history or an individual that you want to tell their story about. But once that happens, it feels like in order to get to the thing that we all experience, whether a painting, a play, a piece of jewelry or sculpture or a documentary, is revision. That I'm editing, revising, and I know that there's a lot of that the public in general don't really understand how many iterations that we often go through of that editing process. Can you talk about that, Robert?
Well, yeah, editing is, in my industry, is critical. You can overproduce and exhaust your audience. So you have to pick out what's the best parts of whatever it is you're making or doing. And I learned from some amazing people. I worked hand in hand with these big names. And I went to, with Kansai Yamamoto, who the Japanese, he was the guy that did all David Bowie's costumes in the 70s. I mean, Kansai discovered me and took me to Paris, Tokyo, New York, show after show after show. And so, I mean, honestly, I forgot the question. So, I mean, I learned from the best of some of these people who knew how to edit and create collections. So I was on the job training with all these different people all the time. And then I became like them. I became like a leader in the industry, starting trends and making moves. And so the editors and the journalists would cover me and want to know what's going on. So it's because of the editing and creating partitions of ideas that all string together with a DNA that is all you. And I had to do decade after decade after decade of keeping it all together, where the work is actually pared down and I'm not offering too much. So editing is hard, yeah. But I also had to make many, many variations of every design because the editors wanted the store buyers wanted it. They wanted the clip earring in this size and this size and this size. And luckily I had a staff of people that could help me make these things that the stores were demanding and wanting.
Rob, I've been in your studio and watched you kind of say this background, that background, thumbnails, trying to, so that process of creating something and then responding to it yourself before you let it out in the world, and then going, no more blue, no more red, no bigger, smaller, whatever those thousands of choices that you could make. Can you talk about that process of revision? Because your work in some ways has that artifact, that sense that its creation is part of the experience of the viewer.
Right.
You want to see it.
Yeah, so I think, you know, very familiar with revisions, working for skateboard companies and then Adidas and then Navy and all of these companies, you know, it was a lot of, you design something, you go into a design review, and then sales doesn't like it or marketing doesn't like it, and you have to revise it. And so I think throughout those years, and then eventually becoming an art director, it taught me how to help people, you know, my team, to make their revisions on their own. So I was teaching myself. And then once I left the day job, there was no one there. I didn't have an art director above me. I didn't have a boss above me. So I really had to count on me knowing exactly what I wanted. And so, you know, even today, I think there's times where I'll finish a piece and go, nope.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I will cover it up, or I will chip it away and make a new piece. You know, and I think that that's also, you know, my kids kind of freak out about it, but I'm like, I'm not actually destroying something. It just doesn't work. You know, and I want it to work. And so, you know, the panels are expensive, so if I can take what's on there off and make something better, then I'll do it.
Right.
But it's all here, right? You have to know when something doesn't work. And I think with creative people, oftentimes they do know that, just instinctively.
Right.
It's something that we're just born with.
Yeah.
You know when something doesn't work.
Right.
And you can lie to yourself, but it ain't gonna
Also, there are
work.
times when I find myself doing things that I thought I should be doing, but the public told me, no, we don't like that, that doesn't look like you.
Right.
So there were big dips in the market. Sometimes we have very successful because I was right on top. I was doing my thing, and then some season I was exhausted. So that happens.
But it's hard to always be on top, right? I mean, it's, how do you maintain that for decades and decades?
Yeah.
Always being on trend, because as artists, like, we have to look at culture, we have to look at the world and absorb it, and then send it back out to the world in a way that's easily accessible for people.
And there is pressure to keep producing, especially for me. I mean, I feel great pressure that I'm going to be 79 soon, and I still have like another whole career in lighting and chandeliers and all, and home products, which is what I've been doing but now I'm getting to make them by myself, with nobody telling me what to do.
That's why you look so young.
So Cindy, I mean, documentary filmmaking is an editing process, right? Like I don't know how many, Jimmy and the Demons, like 300 hours. So you could make 50 documentaries or just all different. So the process of going through, you know, the first cut, the second cut, the 50th cut, the 70th cut, talk about that. Like, because you're then watching, feeling, changing. Talk about that revisioning thing.
Yeah, it's excruciating. Yes, no, I mean, I don't edit per se. I hire like top editors. Like, you get a really good editor, basically they're the writer, they're the storyteller. And so all the films I've done are almost 300 hours, because documentary, you don't have a script, so you don't know, today we're doing scene one, and we're gonna shoot this. Like, you follow a story, and it unfolds, and there's always something you don't expect to happen, you know, it's amazing, and yet it makes your job a lot harder than if you have a script. So you take 300 hours and you're trying to shrink it down to 90 minutes, and that is really hard, and that is way over my pay grade. And in the meantime, you're throwing things on the cutting room floor, especially with Jimmy Gresham and Guzzi and Jimmy and the Demons. It was like jewels over and over. I can't even tell you what's on the cutting room floor of just hysterical Jimmy and you two being you two, and oh my God, it was incredible. And yet you have to make those hard choices because you have to have a storyline, you know. So that's where you get a good editor that, you know, and you occasionally debate. Usually I have a good relationship with my editors, so we're not screaming, but we are debating a lot of times about, you know, oh, you've got to keep that, and you know, it just doesn't fit. And sometimes we call it kill your babies, which is a horrible thing to say, but you have to just, you know, get rid of something that is great, but it's not great in the whole.
And that is hard work.
It is hard
It's
work.
very hard work.
So hard,
Yeah.
yeah.
Artists can really have a lot of hard work sometimes to maintain what they're doing and keeping on that track, you know.
One of the scripts in one of my television programs, it was version 32 that we shot. And I'm not kidding. It really was literally version 32. And you kind of go like, good God. And as a writer,
Yeah.
oh my God. I mean, editing revisions is actually not more than writing, right?
Yeah, it's
Like,
part of the job, it's just, constantly, but I have what I call the vomit draft. It's just.
that's a secret.
Yeah, it's a secret, and you just, when I would teach, I would always say, just vomit it out, guys, just vomit it out. Because then once it's on, then I say, then once it's there, you can play with it. It's a math problem, because then writing for me, especially when I was writing television, was a math problem, because it really had to be beginning, a middle, and end, and you had, a certain amount of time it had to be under, and so it was like, oh, how much do I keep, and to get it to add up to the script. But the first, vomit is pure creation, and so, and then you just, then you edit, just writing is rewriting, it's like, because right out on the board every time I'm teaching, writing is rewriting, because that's just all it is, so, it's just, you can't write without rewriting constantly.
Robert, I saw a post of yours on Facebook, and I thought it was really interesting, and I want to ask everybody about the same idea. You were looking back at your own work from 50 years ago, and you were commenting on it. And I wanted to ask, are you ever surprised by your own work?
Always, always. In fact,
Do you ever think, did I do that?
yeah, no, honestly, I have to say something about it. A necklace just recently came into my hands. A woman had passed on, and this piece she bought, her husband bought for her a long time ago, like in the 70s. And I saw it, and when I took it out of the bag, my eyes just popped. I thought, oh my God, it's so
Don't
big.
die yet!
It was so bold, it was so big, it was,
Wow.
for the time it was. No wonder people were calling me to borrow things for the magazines. This thing was colossal, and it was way beyond what I would have thought I had ever made then. So when I see those early pieces, I'm realizing how precious they are to me, because they were the building blocks of a whole new way of thinking about jewelry and fashion that took over the whole industry. And then I had my gallery, which supported that, and that just turned into this whirlwind of energy, and more people said, oh, I love that scale, I want to do things like that too. So I was breaking ground for people. They're looking at my old work. That's why I have so much of it.
Rob, talk about that. Like, I've seen some of your early work in your studio that was really very personal, or early small pieces. That's fantastic. Do you ever look back in the same idea and think, wow, I had talent at one point, or
Yeah, I think, sometimes when you have that aha moment and something sparks, it creates a fire. And that fire is you creating a body of work based on that one thing that you did. And you're right, when we did the show at the gallery, there was a whole room of all that work from the early 2000s. And that work, pulling it out, because it's all stored, pulling it out again and looking at it, I realized how fresh that was, and how it felt so good, and how there was so much learning involved. And then I think what happens at a certain point, you sort of go on cruise control. So recently I tried to go back to that, and it doesn't work anymore, because that inspiration isn't there, right? So I have to do something else. But it was, again, like I needed to go back and try and recreate that just for myself, and it didn't work.
Wow. So Annie, not that you're watching Sesame Street, but if you did see one of your old scripts,
Sometimes I wrote them. I was writing so much, that I'm writing success. You think you just, they're out of your head, some of them. But like literally, there was a couple times, it's like, I didn't see my name on it. I was like, oh.
I remember that
I
joke.
wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was actually thinking more about young writing, where it's a little different, I think, because young writing is, it's language, and it's if I read my very early plays that got produced in New York and stuff, they're young. the topics I'm exploring are young, they're for a younger audience, So I love them and I appreciate them, but I don't really like to revisit them too much because the writing is young. And then when and there's a certain plays that I wrote that I knew I hit my stride, and the best writing I'm doing now by far is what I've just written. Coming around, I think the last two scripts that have been in New York and stuff are just they're the culmination of all the youth and all the things that I learned in my youth to become a better wordsmith. Right. In that sense. But I mean, as I say,
your chops.
My chop, yeah. You just I think you do. Writers can really, grow that way. And writing is, it's what it is. I love it, but it's so.
Self-doubt. I want to talk about self-doubt.
Oh God. How much time do we have?
Because I'm not sure that I have barrels of it myself, but I don't know if people really understand how many artists have a lot of self-doubt.
Oh, it never goes away.
It never goes away. No matter how. Do you still have self-doubt? No. You're probably Morris after all.
No, I remember when I was teaching myself how to make jewelry on the commune, right after I graduated college in Wisconsin. And as I'm hammering in this old woodshed on this part of an anvil, I had visions of being on the cover of Vogue. And then it happened.
As a model?
Boys usually weren't on the cover. But I was, so I think I just fell on the right path and I just kept going. I mean, I definitely had my ups and downs. God forbid it wasn't completely fabulous, but no doubts, no. Maybe when I opened Artware at first, I thought, am I crazy to open a jewelry store in Manhattan after only being here a few years? But then when people like Andy Warhol came in, it would change. I'm on the right path. I'm sorry. No.
It's okay, we have enough doubt for you. Rob, talk about your doubt.
That's my personality, if it weren't anything else.
Being an artist, it's cyclical, right? I mean, I think what happens is you start off, in your 20s, early 30s, you're making art, you're trying to find your voice, but you're still young, right? And I think that artists can speak to a larger crowd when they have more experience in the world, right? Because you've lived more. And I forgot what I was talking about.
Self-doubt.
Doubting what I was thinking.
Yeah. So Sydney, do you have self-doubt?
Sometimes I'm a very confident person, which I think helps. And I think what I learned way back when, as I told you, I decided I'm going to make a film. Can I make it your number? Start making this film called Buck. I'm out, with camera crews and stuff. And I actually fired 2 different teams. And these were experienced teams. One was more of a news doc team. The second one was like a Hollywood team. And I knew they didn't have my vision. So my lawyer at the time set up a meeting with Julie Goldman and Andrea Medich, 2 of the biggest people in the documentary world. And I flew to Washington because they were at a film festival. We sit down at a table, I'm pitching this film. I said, I have some footage, and this is what I want to do, but these people aren't getting it. And I was full of doubt at this point. I'm like, I'm fired, too big. I'm nobody. I have never made a film, never taken a film class. And I'm sitting at lunch with the 2 biggest people in my business. And they said, well, we would, we're interested in this film and we kind of would like to do it, but, we're going to have to look at some of the footage. But you're going to have to direct it because you understand what this film is about. And I am sitting there and I nearly fell over. I'm like, oh my God, direct? So we're going from 0 to 60, no film class, now I'm going to be a director. And I mean, it was crazy. It's like you could not make this up. So sure enough, they call up a couple of weeks later and they go, we're in, we're going to do this film with you. You have to direct because horses. I mean, horses, nobody made documentaries about horses and horse people. So you have to do it and we'll get behind it. And I'm like, okay. And so this is what I found out, talking about self-doubt. As I jumped in, because I did know what I wanted to do, I jumped in. I immediately loved directing. I love telling people what to do. Right. No, he's not. I told her to stay home. No, but I immediately loved it. And I'm dealing with people that are really, they are A-listers, and everybody they brought in was an A-lister. And what I realized right away, after doing it for a while, is that, at the end of the day, most people don't have a vision. Most people need somebody to lead them. Most people are looking for you to tell them what to do. And so if you really feel strongly about something, then go do it and fake it till you make it, because that's what I did. And then the film became hugely successful. Everybody's like, Sundance won't take a horse film, don't get your hopes up or anything, we're gonna submit. And we won Audience Award at Sundance with that film. I'd never made a film before. It was really like a Cinderella story. It was totally channeled, but I'm just saying, what I learned is that the self-doubt, which I immediately had when they said you have to direct, I was sort of like, oh my God, do they understand that I've never directed it?
Right.
And then it's just like, it does work out. Like if you know what you want, and you know what you want from your actors and your play and your art, you know when it's there. You know when it's working right. And the other two teams just did not got it. So.
Right. I'm sorry, just one second. We're reaching an hour. Are we okay, everyone staying for maybe 15 more minutes in the room? Zoom?
Yes.
Here.
Yeah, okay, great. So
One thing I was going to say about self-doubt is I don't think it's always a bad, negative thing. I think sometimes it's you just having an internal conversation with yourself about things, right? It's you're doubting yourself, but it's you just working through the process to get to success.
Yeah. Because we all have it sometimes. I'm just saying,
Sure.
I didn't mean I never have it, but I.
Well, this guy.
It does.
Yeah, except for us.
Yeah.
He's
But we
taking
love
the
you, so-
psychedelics, so,
That's right.
never self-doubt,
Exactly. So I'm going to do this as kind of a lightning round here at the end, and I don't want you thinking too much. So I'm going to go through the panel left to right very quickly, and then again. So you'll have a chance to realize what you said the first time. Annie, tell me a secret. This is called The Secret Lives of Artists. I really want a true secret, what you know from your life's experience as a writer. Talk about it. Tell me. Share.
A secret to be a writer, or,
Yeah. I mean, whatever. It could be, it's a secret.
Oh,
Don't do it.
No, here's my secret. Everybody's a writer. I always say this. Everybody's a writer. It's also not a secret, but unless you take a class with me or something. Everybody's a writer. It's just whether or not you're a professional writer or you're, a doctor, filmmaker, but everybody knows how to write, knows how to put down their emotions, what they're feeling, what they're thinking about. So you can, I always talk to people about, I don't journal, I just stopped doing it after a couple of days. But other people are great journalers, but you are a writer because you're writing. So that's my thing.
Okay. Rob.
As an artist, you go into the studio and you make something. You put down one single stroke, right? Not every day are you going to have an amazing day, but you always make art, right? Because I think that's what informed you.
Cindy. Secret.
I don't think it's a secret, but I think that people think, you're making films, it's a glamorous life. Most of my time is spent in front of a computer, honestly. You make a few trips out on shoots and stuff like that, but it's a lot of hard work. And one thing Jimmy said when I was making the movie, which I didn't really get it in the movie, but I wanted it so bad, and it will come out in a little clip, something somewhere. But it's like, people are always asking him about his inspiration as an artist, like, what you wait for the muse, and everybody's like, I'm waiting for that muse as an artist. And it's like, but you always have your pencil in hand, you're always working. And I think that the secret to being successful in any art is you have to have your pen in your hand. You have to
Do the work.
Doing the work. You can't sit around and talk about it and wait for it. You've got to do the work.
It's discipline.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think it's a big secret. I mean, it's in my book and all that stuff, but I actually practiced shamanism for about 15 years. I studied it and practiced it, and it became a huge part of
Which did you do?
Shaman.
shamanism.
Shaman.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Shamanism. And a lot of that stemmed from when I was 17 years old. I fell off a mountain in Rio de Janeiro at 60 feet, and while I was falling, my soul flew out of my body, and I had an out-of-body experience. I went up to the light, I heard the music, it was fabulous music. And I saw this huge white space with two enormous white fuzzy, like made out of cotton figures, who were slowly raising their hands to me. And then next thing I know, I'm on the ground, and my soul went flying back into my body. But from that moment on, I was changed, because I witnessed something that very few people get to witness, which is what it's like when your soul leaves your body like that. And so when I fell into shamanism, I had this huge land in New Mexico, and I was having mystical experiences out there. So I said, I'm going to study why shamanism. And that's one step you should all make in your lives is everything has spirit. There's a quantum physics. It's like everything is alive and moving. So you can never be alone because there is a bond between you and all things. And once you get into that framework, all you have to do is go up into these other worlds and ask for help and guidance from your spirit helpers. So it was really a big part of how I started making jewelry going forward. I got on QVC and I started talking about shamanism to hundreds of thousands of viewers.
What did Calvin say?
He did. Well, he was into Santa Fe a lot, you know. So anyway, shamanism to me is a secret part. It's one of my secrets. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Great. You got any more?
Not after that.
No.
I wouldn't have doubt either.
No, like, so, do we have any questions? Like, does anybody want to know? Yes.
So you're all successful. In artists, you know, it's a really competitive business, right? There are very few who succeed commercially and become famous. You know, there's a lot of actresses who are, you know, hostesses in New York restaurants and they'll remain so. To what extent do you think luck played a role?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, having one gallery in, I guess it was 2009, that elevated me to the next level, and at that point, suddenly other galleries were coming to me, and it was really, it was like a 10-year relationship with that gallery, but that was the one thing that did it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I met him. And,
I was going to say, I know that story.
So I got sort of in the back door at Sesame Street, and I was very poor, and my parents were very ill, and I needed money. And it just, you know, it completely altered my trajectory. I would probably have moved to LA if I hadn't met him.
13 Emmys later.
13 Emmys later.
Wow. I definitely think it's luck, but I think you have to look for your luck. I think that day at that table where there's no one there, and for no reason in the world, I got up and went over to this man and said, I want to make a film about you. You know, which is crazy. But if you're not aware of looking for those situations, if you don't act when you have that little pull in your heart to say, you know, go do this, you know, because it's scary. It's really scary to do that, and so that's luck. But it's also you have to somehow make that luck.
Yeah. Also, to go back to what we said about the you know, the perspiration part of it, where you know, Moni helped me get, you know, a foot in the door. But I spent a year auditioning for Sesame Street, and I mean, and they just put me through the grinder. There was about 8 of us supposedly auditioning for one slot, you know, and I was the last one standing, you know, because I just refused to die. and I knew it was a good job for me, and it was the right job for me, you know. So you kind of hear the message coming in, you know, and then say, I am.
So yeah, I had a really lucky break. A year after the commune burned down, unfortunately. I found myself teaching myself more how to make jewelry, and I was doing flea market shows, you know, where I take the things I've made and I go sit on a blanket or a little folding table, and one of them was at the Putney School in Vermont. And one of the people that came up that bought one of my big necklaces and needed sort of construction. And next day, I'm getting a call from Joan Sonovan from the biggest gallery in Boston. Harkus Krakow Rosen Sonovan was the leading gallery, and she owned the Plaza Hotel, and so Nesta Corporation, and she wants to see all my other jewelry. Wow. So
How old were you?
I was like 27, 28, maybe 25. It's cloudy. So then literally, I went to show them all my work, and they said, this is insane, this is incredible. We want you exclusively at our new place in the plaza called Sculpture to Wear. And you have to call yourself Robert Lee Morris because there's already a famous Robert Morris artist. And we're going to make you famous. They said, well, we are going to make you famous. I just turned around and went, is this my camera? What is that? Because of that day at the Putney School Fair that they came up and bought that necklace, who would have guessed? What my alternative timeline would have been, I don't know.
Right, any other questions? Come on. No, it doesn't seem like it. Oh, wait.
I got one. You were talking about trends before and how you made it through decades of fashion style. And maybe, Cindy, at least for documentaries, don't seem to have changed. They have a focus and a point, but writing and art and the jewelry making. I mean, it's constantly evolving. Do you sometimes not like what you see? You know, some of the trends, fashion especially.
Fashion especially right now.
You know, how do you accept that?
I moved myself to a different direction. Like I did that, I was there, I helped it for 40 years, whatever, in fashion. They're doing crazy stuff. The world is different now. We're not going to Studio 54 anymore. All of us are moving into Reading.
So I think that's the end.